I was not a model student myself, unfortunately. When I came to college, I did struggle and I had those challenges. But I also found those people that were instrumental in helping to keep me engaged with my higher education journey.
I'm in it for the transformation that can take place, because when change happens, a ripple effect occurs, and it impacts families, communities, and future generations.
We want to see students come to our college and get the credential that they want and need to have to change their lives and their families' lives and their own trajectory.
For many, education's the bridge from, say, like their current state to their aspirational state. And I like to know that I had a hand in helping someone take a step towards, that future self.
Having AI at our disposal is all about meeting students where they are.
AI isn't about replacing the human side, but instead amplifying it.
It's able to take a lot of the redundancy out of the day-to-day of the admissions counselor work that a lot of time was ultimately dreaded.
That helps our team concentrate on complex problems when students call rather than answering simple questions.
I do what I do to open the doors of opportunities that may never have existed before, because those opportunities ultimately transform lives.
Visit element451.com and discover how a digital workforce can help empower your team to focus on what really matters.
What I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to AI Arms Race, Leading Without Losing, a special 5-part pulse check series from Enrollify. I'm Dr. Scott Cline, a 20-year higher education executive turned consultant. In this series, we'll be going behind closed doors to hear the real conversations happening within higher education admissions and high school leaders. We'll explore how AI is already being reshaping admissions and why few want to be the first to admit that they're using it, for fear of triggering an arms race. Together, we'll ask, how can you bring what's already happening into the open without feeling the very competition we're trying to avoid? Welcome, Geoff, to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, Geoff, in this series, I've been talking to educational leaders on both the high school side and the institutional side. And as somebody like you who has worked both on the institutional side and is now building a product and writing in this space and being a leader in this space, what are you seeing as the conversation around AI usage in admissions currently today?
Yeah, I think the simplest way for me to put the way I think about this is the genie is out of the bottle and there's no putting it back in. I wrote recently around the idea of AI in admissions being perhaps our silent COVID. And what I meant by that is that when COVID hit, for those of us that were working on the inside of higher ed, we had to move very, very quickly and move at a pace and rate and a level of innovation that was for many inside higher education a little bit uncomfortable, but yet we did it. And I think and would contend that AI is posing the same type of disruption and potentially threat to the core foundation of higher ed and of enrollment, and that the challenge is really going to be on admissions teams to move quickly and diligently and smartly, but to not set this aside and to treat it more like a major disruption, like we saw during the COVID time.
Yeah, as somebody also on the institutional side during the time, I'd like to say that's when I lost the last of my hair on top of my head in a joking kind of way. But, you bring up a really good point. And, what's then that driver to see this differently as a COVID moment or the silent COVID moment, to use the analogy, versus more of the evolutionary changes that we've seen in higher education around adoption to technology or different systems and practices?
You hit the nail on the head there, because even now I see out sort of across the landscape of many institutions reverting back into how decisions and innovation was normally driven, traditionally driven, and COVID being an outlier in terms of how to operate. But I think the signal here, quite frankly, that is most concerning is that students are coming into institutions ahead of the institutions. And that feels to me like a problem. And no matter what dimension you would look at that, when the students are coming in more advanced, further down the path than the higher education institution, that's going to start to create some real dissonance. And I don't exactly know how that's going to be handled, but that is happening right now. And I don't know that we've seen that in sort of recent times. It's not as though all of a sudden the entirety of the potential students moving into college all of a sudden knew, way more history than the institution was capable of teaching and utilizing. So I think this is, this is one of the signals that I've been watching pretty closely.
And you bring this up, keeping on the theme here, is in your new book, The Single Solution, you suggest that data and tools like AI and ML isn't just about bringing the students closer to the institutions that is working with these tools, but rather the smart institutions are helping themselves steer closer to the students. What do you mean by that, and what does that look like in practice?
We're in a very dynamic and challenging world in higher education. I talk about this in the book that I refer to as a Category 5 storm that we're in. And fundamentally, what that means is that there is a confluence of events for enrollment right now that we've never faced. We don't have one or two or three major disruptions. We have 5 major disruptions all hitting at the same time. And fundamentally, when we look at these, including the big one that is that everyone talks and writes about, which is the demographic cliff or the shifting in demographics, and really to sort of oversimplify, when there are fewer students, the environment becomes more competitive, and when you have to compete harder, what you have to do there is you have to get closer to the student, and you have to be able to get closer to a smaller number of students, and this is fundamentally where we set out to apply AI, and call it this kind of first wave, which is to help institutions become more precise and more efficient and effective in getting to a smaller set of students where they then have bandwidth to engage more deeply. And so, there's a lot of there's going to be a million different use cases for AI moving forward. The one that we picked, and you mentioned earlier, coming from inside the house, the phone call coming from inside the house. What I saw with the teams I was working with was not that there wasn't a desire to engage, at a deeper level with students. It was the inability to do that because of bandwidth. And that's really where our application of AI is sort of game changing, is to allow for the teams to actually exhale and take a little bit of a breath and engage with the students that need the most help and where they can make the biggest difference. And again, that's this is just a starting point for how and where AI is going to impact the processes inside of admissions.
And you talk about this as a starting point. Are you also thinking about this of not just, thinking about institutions meeting those students where they are and building that trust on the admissions funnel, but also the institution as a whole listening to this and actually moving forward? Is that what you're trying to think about in your next phases you're talking about?
Well, yeah, I think for sure. And that's going to be a requirement. Again, the nature of the environment we're in is going to require the entire institution. And interestingly enough, in writing this book, we have several sections in here where, we make direct reference to the cabinet and the CFO and the president. And it really is going to require an institution-wide rethinking and alignment around how enrollment works. That's going to be one of the things that separates institutions that thrive through this next phase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. As somebody who has been that institutional practitioner and then working on the, with many different institutions, how are you seeing that conversation currently going about where institutions are at talking about using AI tools? And what are you seeing as like the institutions that are really pushing forward in this space? What does that look like for you?
I mean, it's unbelievably hard right now to be inside, knowing that the world is changing, arguably the most rapid technological change of our lifetime, of history, most likely, right? And trying to figure out what to do. And, the way that I describe this frequently, I did just about an hour ago, is, AI in higher ed, let alone, in each individual, functional area like admissions. But, it already feels like the grand finale of the fireworks show, which is it's chaos. There's lights, there's sound, there's noise. You can't figure out, where one thing started and where it ends and what's what. And, we haven't even really gotten to first base in this, advancement of technology. I think challenge number one is the recognition that you have to start moving forward and thinking about a plan. I'm seeing that at many, many institutions where the message down from the trustees is really simple, which is, what is your plan? And you've got to come back with it. Now, getting to a plan is the hard part. And the advice that I give to everyone around this is to fundamentally, think about it in terms of the processes that you can most readily impact inside of admissions and inside of enrollment. The way to handle this and to go about this right now is not to try and boil the ocean. It's not to try and solve everything at once. It is recognition that AI is most certainly not any type of magic solution for changing an enrollment outcome, but strategic, thoughtful AI, and what I like to call precision AI, to identify, where are the meaningful process gaps or leakage in processes. And what that really means is, where does the team spend time executing a task instead of interfacing with a student? And that's literally what when I sit down with leaders and with cabinets and talk about how do you get this plan going, that is the advice I give, is to take a look at low-level processes and find individual weak spots, not try and tackle everything at once. And what will start to evolve is sort of these incremental efficiency gains, and that will also buy us time to figure out, to sort out the chaos of the grand finale of the fireworks show, and figure out what is noise and what is signal. And what is our version of this plan going to look like at our institution?
When the demands come on high, you see talk about from the board or from outside stakeholders, and the demands are there. Oftentimes the inclination is to rush to deliver a plan, to say, here's what we're going to do in this orderly steps. How much of that is for you, is that planning process? You're more talking, I think, about how process really matters and getting your process really right versus even knowing where the end goal might be. Does that resonate a bit?
It does, and it's possible to do both. If you think about every single product, every platform we use inside of higher ed, let alone admissions, but even let's just talk about our admissions tech stack. Everything's got AI. And this is where it's tough to sort it out. It doesn't require months of planning. It doesn't require, giant committees to start to think about what is the journey of the student and what is the journey you want to take them through. And then where can you start to systematically apply AI to solve those things? And so, yes, it requires planning and thought, but it does not require, a year's worth of studying to get to that point. And one of the mistakes, quite frankly, that we're already seeing out there is in some cases almost running too quickly into AI. I kind of refer sometimes to a concept of vanity AI, which is, AI for AI's sake. And, the reality is that you can get lucky with that if you happen to have applied it to a critical, one of the critical processes. But I know of many institutions that moved very quickly and brought in really, really powerful AI, fantastic technology. The problem was that the specific technology it wasn't solving one of the actual problems holding up enrollment. And so while it might have been amazing, is mind-blowing, the processes that you want to move through this coordination between student and institution. And, AI that solves a problem that is not one of the things that's actually getting in the way of enrollment isn't going to move the institution forward. And, we've already, I think, probably several people listening could probably attest to having experienced some of that already.
Here's a quick word from our sponsor. Southeast Missouri State University needed to launch more targeted campaigns faster, yet they were bogged down by manual campaign builds, slow approvals, and vendor overload. With Element 451, they eliminated 5 vendor tools and gained marketing superpowers in one platform. They saw a 13% increase in applications, processed applications within 2 days, and achieved 33 to 35% email open rates. The impact: personalized, automated campaigns running at scale without the drag. Ready to turn your next campaign around in hours, not weeks? Try an agent today at element451.com/agents.
Yeah, and my experience and my work is often setting the foundation and building the strong foundation, whether or not it's a team, a leadership team, the practitioners on the ground. And I'm sure you've had that same experience where you're like, if that foundation's not set, no matter how fancy of a tool, it's going to end up in the same spot. And usually it's with a new technology being adopted and nobody really addressing the foundation that you got to get set there. While at the same time, not waiting for perfection of that foundation to get started on this journey as well.
That's the fundamental premise of the book, which was to try and capture the fact that essentially there are new signals and that the data and signals that we have relied on up to this point are not telling us the same things. And there's sort of a core thesis underneath what we put together, which is if we believe that the environment of enrollment management has fundamentally and permanently changed. And so far, I haven't had anyone say to me, no, that's wrong. No, it's the same as it was. But if we believe that's fundamentally different, the question that we sort of pose here is, why would we think that the playbook that was put together for a previous environment would work the same in a new environment? To cut to the chase, it doesn't. And this is really where we kind of combine the rapidly changing environment with the use of AI. And to get very, very tactical about it, the signals that we have relied on by and large in enrollment have been diluted. And, a very simple example, I've got a little bit of gray hair here. When I applied to colleges, I did it on a manual typewriter. It was so onerous for me to do that I only applied to 5 schools. But that meant all 5 of those knew I was deadly serious about their institution. And of course, we know that that's the farthest thing from the truth today. And so, that's a real obvious example. But the core underlying signals that we have relied on in enrollment management have been diluted. They do not mean the same thing. And what has happened is, we've increased applications coming in. We've reduced the fidelity of the signaling. And who gets stuck in the middle? It's the admissions teams. This is where we have thought about, leveraging the power, the raw compute power of AI to try and put them back on a level playing field, particularly in a world where they've got to get closer to a smaller set of students. So it's, there are a lot of moving parts right now. There's no question about it. This is a tumultuous time for admissions leaders.
Yeah. And oftentimes, putting ourselves in our students' perspective, whether or not they're a high schooler or a transfer student or somebody coming back into education after being out of it or never joining it for decades. Oftentimes they can hear this AI tools in higher education, particularly involved in the admissions process, and feels like it's going to take the humanity out of them. And vice versa. Oftentimes working with admissions counselors and admissions team, they're like, oh, AI is going to replace my job and take my humanity out of it. What does this look like for you, and how are you helping institutions navigate that?
Yeah, well, let's start with we all are going through this together at the same time, and it's really interesting, borderline frightening to try and figure out what this is going to look like in the future. But that being said, I still revert back to the fact that this decision, this is still one of the big 3 or 4 decisions in someone's lifetime. And I don't believe that right now we're in a position where the gravity and magnitude of that decision is going to be turned over to 2 different AI robots, right? The student's AI robot automatically communicating with the college's AI robot. Now, I won't go so far as to say that's never going to happen because, who knows where this is going to go and where it's going to take us. Basic consumer decision science would direct us to the fact that there's a big portion of this decision that becomes very emotional, right? And in fact, every consumer decision goes through, I'll call it an oversimplified 3-phase path, which is an objective phase where there's an assessment of basic needs, or basic needs being met. And the final objective phase is, how do I complete this, right? How do I complete my registration and my housing and my financial aid? But that middle section is highly subjective and highly emotional. And by the way, this same pattern is true whether we're making the decision on a college, a new house, or a bottle of water in the gas station. We just go through it much faster, and the stakes are much lower with a bottle of water than it is a college. And that middle section of finding emotional fit, that's the piece that I think we've got to be careful not to lose. And not just careful, but institutions that don't recognize how the decision process works and try to insert technology for technology's sake, I think they're going to suffer because they have lost touch of the humanity and how the human makes decisions. And this is, when we think about the use and deployment of AI in admissions, this is sort of one of our core tenets, which is, how do we amplify the humans, and how do we help build on all of their best instincts? How do we get them with students and take away all of the other work that over time has pulled them away from the students themselves? This is going to be tricky, and I do think that there's the risk of thinking, wow, we could just automate all these teams away, and it might end up there, but I'll tell you what, I would not want to be the first institution to go say, we're not gonna interact in this middle subjective emotional section of the decision process. We're gonna assume that doesn't exist, and we're gonna let the robots handle it.
Yeah, and back to the premise of the most successful institutions in this environment or the future environment are the ones that are not just moving their admissions and their enrollment processes to their students, but moving their institutions to serve their students. I mean, we're all saying that, but like the ones that are going to be the most successful, that fits with this theme.
Let me just add that as of right now, like just with what we're doing right now, we can pull somewhere between 30 and 50% of an admissions team time, bring it back to them. And that's without trying to override or eliminate this critical section of communication with students.
And the theme of this miniseries and the premise that I'm working off of, and I'm wanting to get your thoughts on this, is like, by having more of these conversations out in the open on the institutional side and with the students and the families and the communities that we're trying to serve, we can have a better path forward. For you, working with these institutions, where are you seeing and where are you advising institutions to be able to have this conversation more out in the open, be able to talk about it and in a proactive way?
I mean, obviously, I spend my time on the institution side, and I'm not, sort of deep on the student side, or as deep as others are. But even from where I am, I'm hearing the reverberations of lack of trust. By the way, it's lack of trust on both sides now, right? I mean, it really is, and this is going to be one of the challenges. And to your point, I do think it requires open communication. It really starts with the ability to articulate what is our plan and what does AI mean? Again, I'll go back to where I started. When students are coming into an institution and they are already fluent in this, and then they come onto campus and it's like it doesn't exist. And there are discrepancies between, one class and another class, or one program and another program. This is what I think institutions have to tackle very, very quickly. The other piece is to be able to articulate a little bit of what we just spoke about, which is how and where is it being used? If a student is worried that the entirety of their admit decision is being made by an AI agent, that clearly would evoke a sense of mistrust as to how things were really operating. And is this an institution that's going to care deeply about me and about my journey and my outcomes and helping support me? And so, this is a very complicated question. And I'll kind of go, kind of revert back to, there are lots of industries. We all have friends in, outside of higher ed. There are lots of industries where, the sole objective and the victory is removing the humans. I do not believe that is the case here, but because of the very nature and the mission of what we do. I don't think that is the outcome. And I think institutions are going to need to say that and then have plans that support that and be able to demonstrate that that's the case.
Yeah, and my hope with this is having more of these conversations help us not just come up with better solutions and engage with this and plan with this, but also build more and more of that trust, particularly with the students that we're trying to serve the most as well. So thank you, Geoff, for coming on the podcast. I can recommend to everybody to definitely get a copy of the new book out, Signal Solution. Where's best for people to stay connected with you and engage with you?
Yeah, well, you obviously had an early read. I appreciate you taking an early read and giving some feedback on that, but that can be picked up on Amazon. The easiest place is really either through our website at enrollml.com or to find me directly on LinkedIn. I have a lot of kind of active conversations on my LinkedIn with various, not just enrollment leaders, but people in the ecosystem, where we sort of have ongoing conversations around very similar to this. What's happening? What's going to happen? And what are we going to do about it? How do we stay in front and not get caught being dragged behind?
Thank you, Geoff, so much for all the insights, and thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, appreciate it, Scott. Thank you.
The Higher Ed Pulse is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our show helps higher ed marketers and admission pros find their next big idea and features a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Brian Gross, Eddie Francis, Jenny Lee Fowler, and so many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.